thinking. So Twitter is on, Facebook is on, LinkedIn is on, and I'm waiting for YouTube. YouTube is taking a long time. Oh, YouTube is on as well. Okay. So we're looking good. Let's see the title. All right, so we have a couple people in the, so we're already live, but we have a couple people in the waiting room. So what I'm going to do is disable the waiting room so everybody can just more or less come in. And yeah. Okay, let's see. Gotcha. All right, good. Okay, so I'm just going to give a minute or so to some others who may be trickling in, and those who are joining us on LinkedIn and Facebook and YouTube. Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening, everyone.
All right. So this meeting is recorded. So as always, if you do not want your image to be captured, just leave your camera off. So as we've always done with our live stream, well, since we started it a couple of years ago, I'll just run through a few slides just to kind of set the scene. But this is your forum. This is your opportunity to ask questions. So some of you did send questions in advance. Thank you very much. I know those who are not on Zoom, you can't see, but we have a chat box on Zoom where we have some questions. Those who are on Zoom, feel free to add your questions to the chat box below. Those that may be watching on Facebook or elsewhere, feel free again to comment below, and I'll be toggling back and forth, and we'll have a look at your questions and we'll jump into them there. So without further ado, I will now share my screen. And I will just quickly run through a presentation that I have for digital nomads or location independent entrepreneurs in general. Right. All right. So, okay, great. So welcome. Dickie, Hannah, and I are members of Mosrol in Asia Pacific. I've been sitting in Singapore since 2013. Because I am US qualified, I am legally required to say that nothing that I say here should be construed as advice. I may be a tax consultant, but I'm not your tax consultant. So if you need advice about your specific and unique circumstances which you would like to take action upon, people are talking. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mute everybody. Yes. Right. I strongly advise that you retain your own tax consultant. Nothing we say here should be construed as encouraging you to pay less than your fair share of taxes in any jurisdiction in which you're exposed. This is entertainment or education, depending on your perspective, but this is not tax advice. All right, wonderful. Answer writing. So yeah, I'm just going to run through some key messages, some key points I want you guys to take away. 6 in all, and then we'll jump into some Q&A and have some fun. So flag theory, I know that there are companies that they've used the term flag theory in Singapore, and I believe that there's one in KL as well. But initially, I believe the term was coined by a guy called Harry Schultz back in the 1950s. But basically, it's about diversifying your lifestyle and not having your eggs in one basket. That's essentially where it is. So where you have your citizenship may not necessarily be where you're resident, may not necessarily be where you have your bank. may not necessarily be where you've incorporated your company. So it's about diversifying your situation as much as makes sense. I mean, you're not diversifying for diversification's sake. I've seen people say, well, there's Six Flags, so I must find Six Flags, or there's Seven Flags. No, it's about what makes sense. No one size fits all. Fake news. So this is funny. Our team and I have a lot of fun with this. When you go on to various groups, especially on Facebook, there are people who are not qualified, no license, no professional liability insurance, dispensing advice. I'm sure their heart is in the right place, but we see a lot of people getting in trouble. Um, it is a tricky thing, but your best bet is to retain a team that is exposed or has expertise or licenses in the jurisdictions in which you're exposed. So, I mean, that sounds pretty straightforward, but you know, there's an appetite out there for hacks and shortcuts, but when you get free advice, you typically get what you pay for. So I'm just going to call out a few, like e-residency, for example. E-residency is not necessarily an immigration status, nor is it tax residency necessarily. In the case of Estonia, where I see it most often used, it's about a government portal like an e-government portal, where it makes doing business with the government easier. It's not necessarily about legal residence. That's something else. And speaking of legal residence, I see a lot of people talking about taxes and consideration of taxes without much attention being paid to immigration rules. And in Bali, in particular, that is, as you're well aware, something that is very important. Some jurisdictions don't enforce immigration rules as aggressively as Bali does. Case in point, the Philippines, they're pretty relaxed, relatively speaking, relaxed about what you can and can't do. So you can, enter the Philippines and you can go to co-working spaces and you can work and you can do whatever. In Indonesia, they're pretty strict. So if it is that you're found to be working, attending meetings, handing out cards and stuff like that, if you're caught, you could be in breach of the immigration legislation. So something to keep in mind. Different countries are different, right? Singapore is also pretty strict. Australia is pretty strict. But Thailand is kind of laid back. So is the Philippines. So each jurisdiction is different. And I've seen on many websites or in groups discussions of jurisdictions like Portugal, Malta, BVI, whatever. It's tax free, it's tax free, it's tax free. Portugal, Portugal is tax free ish, but not really. There are lots of exceptions. And it's very, very nuanced. What you'd find is that when it comes to tax rules, there's a reason why tax legislation, like in the US, is 8 million words, right? That's federal, not even state, not even talking about state. So it's the reason why tax legislation tends to be tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of words. And when you see someone just summarizes it in a paragraph or so, understand that that means that a lot of the nuance could be lost. So pay attention to the rules. And then there's another debate as to whether it's possible to basically continuously move around and pay no taxes. Now, I have seen it done. It is technically possible, but our perspective is that it comes back to bite you. And the reason why is that conversation, and we can have it later on if you want, is not just about taxes, but it's about banking. So once you factor in banking rules, then you would perhaps recognize that being tax resident nowhere, while it may be possible, is not advisable. But we can take a deeper dive into that later on. When people talk about taxes, there's exhaustive conversations about direct taxes, so corporate taxes and personal taxes. But what it doesn't get that much attention would be indirect taxes. So, for example, GST in Singapore, VAT in Europe, sales and use taxes in the US. So, especially people who run online businesses, indirect taxes is something that you should be paying attention to, regardless of where you are, even if you're running it from Bali, which when we get into the Q&A, we see that running a business from Indonesia is has a lot of responsibilities tied into it. But anyway, that leads me to this point actually. So people under the mistaken impression that I incorporate a business in Singapore or BVI or Caymans or US LLC, and I'm gonna run it from Bali because I like Bali. Well, according to the rules, I'm not just Indonesia, but most countries that you'd be aware of, like even Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, everywhere that you could probably think of quickly. Even if you incorporated another jurisdiction, the fact that you're running that company from Bali means that your place of effective management is Indonesia. And that's taxable in Indonesia, regardless of where it's incorporated. And we can get it, you can take a deeper dive into that later on if that's something you want to discuss. And have something about Nexus. Of course, if you're US exposed, even though you do not live in the US, you still need to file and pay taxes in the US. So the US is in its own situation. So US exposed, you live in Bali, you need to consider Indonesia, but you also need to be considering the US responsibilities as well. For those who are in other developed countries, understand that there are fallback rules. So it may mean that even though you're not resident back in Australia, New Zealand, the UK, or whatever the case may be, under certain circumstances, you may still be taxable there. And we can take a deeper dive into that, but it's something that you need to pay attention to and speak to an advisor so qualified. So just being non-resident in those countries doesn't necessarily mean that you are not a tax resident just because you're not physically there. And there are lots of rules around center of life and so on. So please keep that in mind as well. For those that live in the rest of the world, it may be simpler with other jurisdictions, but you should double check. But of course, there's always banking. Basically, once you're making money and you're moving stuff from account to account or whatever, banks don't feel comfortable with people who are not tax resident anywhere. And we can get into that in detail in the Q&A, but that's essentially why. I mean, there are other reasons as well, but that's like the number one reason for not electing to be tax resident nowhere. And we see regularly, unfortunately, clients who have made that mistake and they're paying for it. So they're locked out of their home countries because they didn't select a jurisdiction and they haven't been filing and paying taxes. So there's no way to demonstrate that the money that they've earned is legitimate. And they are locked out of their homes. And I can give you some examples of that later on. Okay, and so from what I've just summarized very, very high level, it's pretty clear that with all the jurisdictions and all the nuances, it's unrealistic to expect one human being to know everything. And I always say that if one person puts forward that they are an expert in everything, that's probably not true. If it's too good to be true, it usually is not. So with that in mind, let's get to the fun part, which is taking a dive into your questions. As I mentioned, please put your questions in the chat boxes below, whether you're here on Zoom or on Facebook or anywhere else. And we'll go through them one by one in the order in which they received. So we have a few that were submitted by email. Thank you for that. And let's jump into the first question now. So I'm reading it for those who aren't on Zoom, so can't read it themselves, right? So question one, I have a question in advance for the taxes for Digital Nomads webinar. I understand that if you stay more than 183 days per year in Indonesia, you're considered a tax resident. So Dickie, this is one for you. As someone who travels many countries for work, I come in and out of Indonesia regularly. In brackets, they have a business 211 visa. I guess you would know what that is. In some years, this means I may be more than 183 days in country. I would be happy to pay taxes there to offset against UK taxes, as UK and Indonesia have an agreement, but I don't have an NPWP number and can't get one as I have no KITAS. I understand that you pay 20% flat rate if you don't have NPWP, but there are no directions on how to submit this if you have no NPWP. Now, before Dicky comes in, I'm going to introduce him. Dicky's the head of tax at Moores Rowland in Indonesia. For those who don't know, Moores Rowland Indonesia is the fourth largest accounting firm in Indonesia. Dicky runs the tax is in Indonesia, so you're in good hands. Dicky, over to you. You're on mute.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So the question is, how to get MPWP? MPWP is Indonesian Tax ID without a KITAS. The answer is cannot. MPWP is issues based on KITAS. Okay. Second questions, 20% flat rate. Okay, there is a 20% flat rate, but it is a withholding income tax. Withholding income tax withhold by a company who pay your services in Indonesia. So you cannot, as a foreigner who have NPWP, you cannot pay by yourself the income tax of 20%. Okay, the 20% is the withholding income tax rate for payment by Indonesian entity to foreigner. Okay. If you have NPWP and you become Indonesian domestic taxpayer, and the highest progressional rate right now currently is 30%.
Okay, so in summary, this person is dipping in and out of Indonesia, but they, on a calendar year, they're going to pass 183 days, so they're going to be Indonesia tax resident. But they can't fulfill their obligations to Indonesia because they don't have an NPWP, which is a tax ID. And they cannot get a tax ID because they do not have a KITAS. So they're kind of stuck. So the 20% withholding that they refer to is if someone is paying them, like if they're rendering a service in Indonesia, by law, that person who's handing over that cash is supposed to withhold 20% and send it to the tax authority. And that's a 20% withholding. So the correct thing for this person to do is to get a KITAS and then get the NPWP and pay their taxes. Am I correct in saying that, Dicky?
Precisely.
Okay, perfectly. All right, so I'm going to scroll down to question 2. And for those who are, sorry, I was just messaging some people who just joined us on Facebook. Welcome. We're going through the questions that were submitted in advance on Zoom. If you have questions, please put them in the boxes below Facebook or wherever it is you're viewing us from. So question 2, quick question. I am a German citizen living in Bali with a KITAS. So this person does have a KITAS. Is there a tax treaty between Indonesia and Germany? Dicky?
Yes, there is.
Okay. So so there is, so whoever that asked that question, you have an answer. But more importantly, both Indonesia and Germany and most developed countries, to be honest with you, recognize the principle of foreign tax credits. So typically you're not going to be taxed twice on the same income. Once you can demonstrate, well, you're in Indonesia, right? So Indonesia, you're working there, so Indonesia typically will get first bite of the cherry. So whatever it is you're doing in Bali, Indonesia takes its bite first. Now, if it is that you do have to file taxes back in Germany for whatever reason, then you should be able to get credits on your tax liability to Germany using evidence that you have paid taxes already in Indonesia. And the other way around, if you have German source income, for example, you have rental property, you have investments in Germany, and you're getting rental income, you're getting dividends, you're getting interest, whatever it is, the German source income, it's arising in Germany, so Germany should tax it first. But you are based in Indonesia and you're a tax resident in Indonesia. Indonesia is taxing you on your worldwide income. And but Indonesia may be able to give you a credit for the taxes already paid in Germany on that German source income once you can demonstrate that those taxes were paid. Dickie, am I fair in saying that?
Yes.
Okay, great. I'm moving on to question 3. The fee, the fees for tax consultants can be high, and I don't make much money. What should I do? That's a tricky one because, as I mentioned before, what typically happens is that they go into a Yahoo group, oh, sorry, not Yahoo, I'm mixing them up, in Facebook groups, on some online forum. They ask a question, someone who may be well-intentioned but not qualified gives them an answer. And you never know whether that person's situation really is similar to yours and whether you provided enough information for them to arrive at the advice or the conclusion that they're offering you. At the end of the day, regardless of who tells you what, you are ultimately responsible. You have an obligation under the laws of Bali, of Indonesia, and whatever other jurisdictions you may be exposed to. You can blame no one but yourself if something were to go sideways. So what I suggest is that you educate yourself. You can buy books on, we've written a book. If you check htj.tax, we have books that are available on Amazon. And if you have like Kindle or whatever, it's going to be free or close to free anyway. You can check online blogs from people who are qualified to give those perspectives rather than someone who may be well-intentioned or is trying to be a YouTube influencer or a Facebook influencer or an Instagram influencer. I wouldn't give the fate of my business over to someone whose ambition is to be an influencer, even though they may be well-intentioned. So in short, you need to do some research. You need to invest the time. If you don't have money, invest the time. Do your reading, buy some books, download some articles from accredited sources, and educate yourself because ultimately you're responsible for what happens. I hope that helps. Number 4, I need to optimize my tax position. How do I work with you and your team? Well, people approach us in different ways, right? And generally speaking, I put them into 2 buckets. Those who come with specific questions. So like, this is what I do. This is the nature of my business. I need help with my Indonesian taxes, or I need help with declaring foreign income on my Indonesian tax return or Indonesian income on my US tax return or whatever. They're very specific questions. And we can quote for either the advisory and or the compliance, actually helping them with Indonesian tax returns, which will be Dickie and his team, or other jurisdictions, either myself or one of our colleagues in another country, if it is a country that we have an office in, Australia, New Zealand, Malaysia. Some people have Hong Kong. Hong Kong companies were pretty popular with people in Bali up to a few years ago. So we can help you with the returns, or we can help you with the advisory. Now, the other bucket is where someone has a business that it's still in its infancy, or it's just starting out and they need help structuring it. So for that, we approach it in 1 of 2 ways. Some people have like a pitch deck and they send that in, we read it, and they evaluate it and they highlight what their concerns are, and we would propose a structure given what they have put in writing to us. Alternatively, we just have Zoom consults for which we charge. It's not free. And then we have a back and forth, we have a conversation. And some people prefer that as it helps them clarify their thoughts, because it's not necessarily a business that is properly documented and everything is in writing. So those are the 2 categories, where people have specific questions, that's one thing, and those who have an idea and they just need help structuring it out, and that's another type of engagement. So that's how we work. You can message any of us directly, or because Hannah had reached out to you, so you have Hannah's email. I've emailed you. You can email us, so you can check my website, hgj.tax, or you can check Dickie's websites, which is mooresroland.com, is it?
Yeah.
Is your mooresroland.com. Right. So, and you can reach out to any one of us and start the conversation. We all talk to each other, so it'll get to the right person eventually. Question 5. Oh, Dickie, this is another one for you. There's an unverified rumor going around Bali that the new law, I guess they're talking about the omnibus law, I'm guessing, means that foreigners are only taxed on Indonesia source income only. None of their foreign income is taxed. Is this true, or is this fake news, Dickie?
Okay. It is true, but there is only for 25 professions, mostly engineering, in the science area, and that's number one requirements, only those 25 professions. And then number two, it's only lasts for 4 years since you enter Indonesia for the first time. So if you already enter Indonesia and work in Indonesia since 2001, for example, then it cannot be used anymore. It's already past more than 4 years.
So it's very, very precise in terms of duration, and it's also very precise in terms of those professions.
Yes.
Now, how do you what sort of evidence? Like you said, one of them is an engineer, for example. Like, how do I prove, if I were an engineer and I wanted to avail myself of this tax planning opportunity, what proof do I need to present of my qualifications?
So number one, they require you to provide the certifications that you are the engineer specialist. And then you have to register the documents when you are applying for the working permit in Indonesia.
Okay, so it needs to be accredited, and and this registration, is it like say I qualified in Australia? Let's say I'm an Aussie engineer qualified in Australia. Do I need to get it that I from the University of Sydney or whatever? Do I need to get it certified by the Indonesian embassy in Australia first, or can I? Or is it, do I just pull up my certificate and the tax office here in Bali or in Jakarta will be able to certify it? Do you know?
Until now, there is no clear regulation technically for that. Okay, so but make sure that you are applying for that for this in what you call it, this incentives, this facility, tax facility, when you register at first before you come to Indonesia to work.
Okay, so it must be done in home country. I cannot wait until I arrive. So if I'm in Bali now, I cannot do it from Bali. I need to do it from outside.
I think you can. I think you can. I think you can, but just make sure that you, because there is a administrative work after you get the letter of certification. Then you have to inform the tax office that you can get this facility.
Okay, all right, understood. Thank you. We have another question, so I'm going to read it now for those who are not on this platform. I have been in Indonesia for 2 to 3 years on and off. I'm a UK citizen with no ties to the UK. I have a KITAS. So this person has a KITAS. Until recently, I have not been making any profit investing in crypto or foreign exchange, but have started to make a profit recently. What is my liability in Bali? Dickie?
Then you have to pay income tax from your source income in Indonesia and also worldwide income.
Yeah.
But
So so they need to, engage a tax professional,
Yeah.
complete the tax returns, and the calculations on the form would then allow them to calculate what the liability is. But as you
Yes.
pointed out, it's on the worldwide income,
Mm.
right? Including crypto, including foreign
Yes.
exchange, even though it's in a crypto, it's being in a crypto exchange in Singapore, or Australia, or
Mm.
somewhere else.
Mm.
It's still taxable in Indonesia.
Indonesia, yeah. It's self-assessment, right?
Self-assessment.
Mm.
And also their asset declarations. So if they still have bank accounts in the UK, they need to declare, it's not going to be taxed, right? But they need to
Mm.
declare their bank accounts in the UK. They need to declare their rental properties back in the
Mm.
UK. Everything needs to be declared on that tax return, right?
Yes, that's what the law said.
All right. And they said they've been, so I'm just looking at the question again. They said if they've been in Indonesia on and off. So when they're off, and they're not in Indonesia, if they're back in the UK, I know you say you have no ties, which helps with the Center of Life test. But there's also the statutory residence test on the HMRC website, which you should go through, and it takes you, question by question, like, and counts your number of days and whatever. And at the end of it, it'll give you its judgment as to whether you are UK tax resident. So it's not just about Center of Life, it's about counting your days in the UK as well. And if you haven't been in the UK, where have you been?
Mm.
And wherever else you have been, if you've been there for more than a certain number of days, you may not have the equivalent of a KITAS in those places. But if you've been there for a certain number of days, you may have tax residence and you may have tax exposure there as well. So you should not just look at Indonesia, but have a second look at the UK and anywhere else you have been tax resident. Any other questions? So I'm just going to have another look on Facebook. No. Oops, yes. One comment. Okay, someone is asking, will you be able to share the deck from the beginning of the presentation? We'll be curious to check out some of the links from there. Yes, the entire presentation will be on our website, hej.tax, as well as on Facebook, in our Facebook page, as well as LinkedIn and anywhere else. We're going to put it on a lot of podcast platforms, wherever you get your favorite podcasts, Apple Play, SoundCloud, Amazon, we kind of put it everywhere. So yes. Someone else is asking another question about previous or other Facebook lives. Yes, the other live streams are also on those platforms, not just this one. Okay, good. All right, so that's it for that. Do we have any more questions? Or is it going to be a quick one today? Nope. Okay. All right, so that looks like it's it for today. Oops, someone else is typing. Okay, so we have 3 more questions. Sorry, I'll just read them in the order in which I see them here. At what level of income does it make financial sense to engage your company's services? Gosh, that's a good question. I see somebody liked that question. So there's no real income threshold. If you contact us and you identify what your situation is, we can give you a quote. And what may be okay for one person may not be okay for another person. So just contact us, explain your situation, we quote, and you can decide whether or not you want to proceed from there, if that makes sense. So there's no threshold, really. It's just some people consider us affordable and some people aren't, because we're not unlicensed and a professional team without any insurance or any sort of accreditation or whatever. Those with lower overheads who didn't have to study anything, obviously they would have a lower fee structure because their costs would be different. So Yeah, so everyone is different, right? Next question. Would you be able to share the deck? Okay, yeah. Okay, I responded to that one already. I have to leave early. Will this be saved? Yes, it will be saved on HJ.tax, on Facebook, YouTube, SoundCloud, wherever you get your favorite podcasts. It will be saved there in a couple days. So, okay. Any more questions, or is that it? Okay, that seems as if it's it. We have, all right, let me just check one more. Okay, checking YouTube. Okay, that's it. Thank you very much for your time. Those of us who joined us today. Dickie, thanks for sharing your expertise and for demystifying taxes for digital nomads in Bali. My name is Darren. Thank you on behalf of Moz Roland, and we will see you next time.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Bye.